Withdrawal of troops in Afghanistan is as dangerous as ever. At least 5 rockets were fired in Kabul on Monday morning, Reuters reported, adding that they were shot in the direction of Kabul's international airport. Take a look at this live shot. President Joe Biden, meanwhile, has been briefed on the alleged attack, according to a press statement from the White House. On Sunday, a U.S. drone blew up a vehicle heading for Kabul airport that officials say was carrying several suicide bombers. The Taliban condemned the strike, saying it killed several civilians. The U.S. is expected to wrap its military and civilian evacuations and withdraw the last of its troops by Tuesday, and as efforts are being made to arrange formal talks on Afghanistan among all the key international players. So joining us now to discuss is Bloomberg opinion columnist Bobby Ghosh in London for us. Bobby, let's just start with the airstrike on Sunday, which the Taliban says killed several civilians. How does this show really the difficulties ahead for the Pentagon's over-the-horizon plan of attack in Afghanistan? Walk us through some of the complications here.
Well, for the Biden administration, the whole strategy of counterterrorism after the last of the American troops have left Kabul will be predicated on the ability to gather usable intelligence and then, when necessary, conduct strikes like the one we saw against what the Americans have very good intelligence on to be key Al-Qaeda or Islamic State operatives and attempt to take them out. But as we saw, this can get very, very messy. When you don't have enough intelligence, reliable intelligence from the ground, there's a very high risk of mistakes being made. We don't yet know what exactly happened in Kabul on Sunday. The U.S. says that it targeted and took out an Islamic State operative and prevented further attacks being conducted against Americans, against the airport. But we have credible reports from the ground in Kabul, reported by international journalists and international agencies, that civilians were killed, that an entire family, including several children, including a 2-year-old child, were killed in the attack. That's going to be a pattern. I think we're going to see lots and lots of repetitions of that story. Remember, this was very familiar to those of us who've been following Afghanistan over 20 plus years, where if you think back to 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, there were so many reports of airstrikes that were thought to be against Taliban positions, Al-Qaeda positions. In the end, turned out to be against a wedding party in which celebrating families fired guns off into the air. So those are the kinds of risks that the new counterterrorism strategy is going to face. And of course, every time innocent people die on the ground, that has an enormous effect on goodwill or the public attitudes towards the United States. That has an impact on the ability and willingness of people on the ground to collaborate and cooperate with the United States.
And when you say that, Bobby, you're speaking specifically about the Taliban. You have a really fascinating column out that really digs into sort of the challenges in really sort of normalizing relations with the Taliban. Can you just walk us through sort of where we're at right now and sort of the challenges that might be ahead for the U.S. in terms of working with the Taliban against terrorism in Afghanistan?
Well, the biggest problem, Jen, is that the Taliban is not one single organization in the way that the Biden administration seems to think that it is. It is a collection of different groups, different factions who have a common ideology and sometimes follow some elements of a common agenda. But there's a lot of room for disagreement and different factions going different ways. Now, some of those factions are out-and-out terrorist groups. The Haqqani network, for instance, has been labeled by the United States as a terrorist group. Other factions are very close to terrorist groups, are very close to Al-Qaeda, and some, particularly at the lower levels of the Taliban, foot soldiers and low-level commanders, have relations on both sides of the Al-Qaeda versus Islamic State divide. Remember that the Islamic State, when it arrived in Afghanistan, recruited from within the ranks of the Taliban. So there's a lot of fighters who are now on the Islamic State side who have close relationships with their friends and brothers at arms, and sometimes actual literal brothers who fight on the other side. So making a deal with the Taliban is always going to be fraught. There's always going to be a risk that that deal will not be honored by elements of the Taliban on the ground in different provinces. We've seen this before. We saw this happen the last time the Taliban was in charge. There's a great danger to putting any faith, any trust in the Taliban and assuming that any deal struck with the leadership will be followed through, will be respected across the board by all the elements of this group.
So, Bobby, what does that mean for the next 24 hours? I mean, as we said, Tuesday is supposed to be the official withdrawal date. But what are you paying attention to over the next several hours?
Well, so the first and most important thing is, what are the risks of more rocket attacks against the Americans as they leave? Then the second question is going to be, how many Americans get left behind? We're hearing numbers ranging from 150 to 300 Americans will not make it out in time and will remain in the country. What happens to them, and who guarantees their safety? And then, of course, the biggest question is what happens to the Afghan people, the millions of Afghans who basically had a glimpse of a new and different life for the last 20 years and enthusiastically participated in the programs that the international community brought to that country. What happens to them now that they are left to the mercies of the Taliban? The Taliban is saying, well, some elements of the Taliban are saying that they want to maintain some of the freedoms that the Afghans have, that women can go to university, can participate to some degree in public life. But there are other elements of the Taliban who don't believe that at all, who never went along with those ideas. And in parts of the country where the Taliban has been in charge for now quite a while, several years in some cases, they've really gone back 20 years to what the country that they left behind. They've been quite happy to take take Afghanistan backwards. The great fear is that they will do the same thing to the whole country.
And there's also a question, too, about what happens to all of those refugees and the people who did get out. I mean, how does President Biden, considering sort of where we're at now, sort of take control of the situation and really what you sort of outlined really well there, a crisis sort of at hand?
Well, that's the first wave of refugees, the people who were able to get on those planes leaving Kabul airport. There will be other waves of people trying to escape the country through its borders, into Pakistan, into Iran, into the former Soviet states in Central Asia. People trying to cross land borders with their families. So this is just the first wave. Now, it's going to take an enormous international effort, led by the United States, of course, but it'll take an international effort because we're going to see, I fear, hundreds of thousands of Afghans basically fleeing the country. Where do you house them? Where do you place them once they get out of the country? The countries in the neighborhood, remember, already have very, very large numbers of refugees. Pakistan, Iran, Turkey already have millions of refugees that they're struggling to take care of. What do you do with these fresh waves? Can the international community at this moment get together and protect them? There will be fears that among those refugees are potential terrorists, potential bad guys. That's always a fear, and there will be politicians who hype up that fear because that pays off in elections. But then there is a new fear, COVID. All these people escaping a country where vaccination was not anywhere near the standards that we see elsewhere in the world. They may be carrying the virus and going into communities that are already more vulnerable. So there's a whole host of complexities that the international community will have to deal with. The sooner they start, the better.
Yeah, and definitely not a story that is going to be ending tomorrow. Bloomberg Opinions, Bobby Ghosh, thank you as always.